And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Judith Tylke, who had 2 near-death experiences, which we're going to talk about and more. Judith, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Judith, let's start with your first one and go from there.
My dad was a construction engineer and his career was overseas, and we traveled with him. So in 62, we were in the Canary Islands in Las Palmas. I was close to my 3rd birthday, and I found a bottle of what looked like hot chocolate under the bathroom sink. I opened it up, but it smelled weird, and it was heavy. I dropped it. And I remember touching the stuff that was spilled on the floor. Like I remember putting my hand down in it. And the next memory I have, we're in the back of a taxi. It's careening through traffic. My mother's screaming at the taxi driver in Spanish. Ándale, ándale, arriba, mi hija muerta, my daughter's dying. Her Spanish wasn't great, but she got across what she needed to get. And he's cursing, praying, Mother of God, help me, and riding the horn. It was a careening, being thrown around in the back seat kind of thing. He got us to the hospital. They take me into a room. My next memory goes from the taxi to the room. I don't remember the in-between. And I'm looking at a bunch of adults gathered around a stretcher, but I can't see what they're looking at. I'm seeing the top of their heads and their shoulders, and it's from above them kind of perspective. And I'm bored. Like, why aren't they? I'm talking to them and they don't answer me. Nothing happens. And I notice there's a door. And I think, well, I'll just go over there. And I'm just as suddenly there. And the door opens. And there's this beautiful grassy knoll with a swing set on it. It's the perfect playground for a little kid. And the swing set was the perfect size for me. I didn't need anybody helping me. I could do it myself. And I just started swinging. I was so happy. I don't know. It was just pure, simple, unadulterated joy. You know that swing, you reach the top of the arc, you got that weightless moment? I was flying when I hit that. I was literally flying through the air. It was glorious. Suddenly at the bottom of the hill, this woman appears. She's dressed in white, but didn't look any different to my eyes than the nuns or the nurses in the hospital, just some sort of white outfit. But I didn't recognize her. And she said, it's time to go back now. I said, nope, I'm not going back. I'm having fun. She says, you got to go back. And I said, no, again. And to my left, like it was a spotlight on a stage, all of a sudden my mother was there and I could see her. She was collapsed in a straight back chair and just sobbing her heart out. And the woman says to me, if you don't go back, she'll cry for the rest of her life. So I said, okay, I'll go back. I walked over and took her hand. And as soon as I took her hand, I was falling or sliding through this white mist. But there was a definite sensation of downward movement. Like when you're on a toboggan, you're in soft powder, but there was no friction. There was nothing. It was just this buttery slide. And suddenly, like it was a razor that had come up under me. Just, I'd like slid down it and it had come up from under me. I could feel part of myself be cut away. It was the weirdest sensation. Um, I couldn't remember what was lost. I was just aware that something was gone. And that happened 3 more times. That's it. Mom said I was still semi-conscious when I was handed back to her, and I was unconscious from the time she found me on the bathroom floor. But I told her what I remembered from the taxi drive, and it was accurate. So I know it was real.
What was the brown liquid that you ended up touching?
I think it was some insecticide,
Hmm.
and I absorbed it through my skin. And when you're 2 and tiny, it doesn't take much for your body to be overwhelmed by it. Um, I don't know how that changed me. I can point to knowing there was no death with a knowing I couldn't explain to anybody. Um, I could see auras. I could feel the emotions of others and was very sensitive to the emotional charge in a space. Was I born with that or did I come back with that? There's no way for me to differentiate. Um, I knew religion wasn't telling a true narrative, which was difficult because my family was Roman Catholic. And, asking mommy, why does the priest lying doesn't go over very well. So it made for some challenging points in my childhood.
What do you think was being cut away 3 or 4 times when you were coming back?
I discovered later after my second NDE and a past life regression, our souls have so much juice, so much just plain energy to them. These vessels cannot hold it all. If we tried to embody 100% of that energy, it would literally blow our bodies up. If you raise frequency and vibration, it has to be done on any material in a stepped up way so that the material can adjust, and there's always an end point to it where the material just can't take any higher frequency or vibration. And that's true of our bodies. I think also that it was memory. You have to have amnesia when you come into this world. You can't remember the other side. You're not, it's not something most of us have. So I know for a fact that the energy was being stepped down to a vibration and frequency that this body could hold. Interestingly, after I had my second NDE 43 years later, I stopped having that memory and dream recur because it kept recurring as a dream almost every week. It would happen. Sometimes I would fall into my body and come awake. And other times I would actually see myself sleeping in the bed, and then I'd come back into the body.
Well, let's fast forward to your second NDE.
I was 45, just on the edge of 46. And I'd had pneumonia. Doctor thought it was cleared. I thought it was cleared. That had been in December. By the time April got around, I didn't realize it, but there'd been an infection that had persisted in the bases of my lungs, and it had slowly pervaded my body, and I was turning septic. I think it was the end of the first week of April. There was a family dinner at my mom and dad's because my brother was in town. So my son and I were there for the dinner. And I had a headache that just would not abate. Medication didn't touch it. It was just there. And my mom said, well, why don't you go home and your brother will bring Alex home before he leaves to go, because he lived out of town before he left town. And I was just grateful for a couple hours where I could go home and just not worry about anything and rest. My son was 15 at the time. So I went home, laid down on the couch, and when I woke up again, it was June. The septicemia had overwhelmed my body. My son wasn't able to wake me when he got home. I was taken to hospital and eventually had to be put on a ventilator and was in a coma for 6 weeks. So I have memories of waking to being rolled down a hallway at one point, of being in a room at another. But I don't know where they were happened. Did they happen after I woke up from the coma? Did they happen at some point before I went into the coma completely and was taken to the intensive care? I don't know. At some point, I'm standing in front of the door to my grandmother's kitchen. That's really where it picks up, as if it's like it starts there. And I walk in, and this woman who looks like my grandmother looked when she was younger is in my aunt's kitchen. And for a moment, that confuses me because I'm like, why is she in Adele's kitchen? And then I remember, oh, it was her kitchen, because they'd lived together before my grandmother passed. It was the last kitchen she'd been in. Interestingly, I later found out that that's a really common place for us to be greeted, because we're greeted by whatever family member we were closest to that's already passed in familiar surroundings. And what could be more surroundings, more familiar than your grandmother's kitchen? So she says, I want you to meet some people. And there's these women walking into the dining area we're standing in. Their hair's in all different hairdos, but all of them dated, none of them modern and, from today. And their clothing was all from different eras. None of them looked to be more than 35 or 40. They were all young. Maybe even younger if they were older eras, because people, aged early. But to my eyes, for us now, that was what they seemed to me, just mature adults.
Was your grandmother also looking that age?
Yeah, she looked like she had when I had been very young. So yeah, they all looked, come to think of it, that was close to my age at the time. So maybe that I don't know. Anyway, Meme knew every name. This is your great aunt Agnes. Remember her? And I remembered Matat. This is so and so. This is somebody. She knew every name of every person. Now, I didn't recognize anybody but my sister's grandmother, Agnes. I mean, my grandmother's sister, Agnes, sorry. She's the only one I recognized in terms of I knew this person now, but somehow I knew they were all relatives. That they were my people. It was a kind of weird recognition. She says, you can stay or you can go back. You're going to go back while you decide. And these women are going to go back with you while you decide. And I said, okay. But in my mind, I was asking, decide what? That was my thought, because I was confused. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. As far as I was aware, I was on the couch sleeping. I'm just going to tell it as a single narrative, but some of these memories only came back to me over the course of the last 5 years, and really only solidified after my past life regression, or life between life regression. I'm taken from there to a space that's just like a white room, but it's iridescent. The walls gleam. There's no light sources in it, but it feels like there's light. The walls are made of light, kind of thing. There's this beautiful man, glorious face, just beautiful features, and his eyes are literally shining with love. It's like two spotlights shining on me. He's not dressed in anything. He's just a physical form that's made of light, like you'd see on Star Trek or something. Not not a physical body. And there's people on either side of him, four on either side. And in the space between us, they start a review of my lifetime. Remember in Star Trek, the holodeck, or was it Star Wars?
Star Trek.
Well, no, the holodeck was Star Trek, but this is where it's like they show up on a table and you see the scene, not like they're life size in front of you, but it's like it was this almost like looking into a hollow tank or something. It was playing out here and you could see the people. I'm talking to people, and it's almost like watching a movie, except when I get into a conflict with somebody. And then I'm me and I feel the words coming out of me. And then I'm on the other side and I'm inside them, feeling and thinking what they're feeling and thinking as they hear my words. Uh, when I did something wonderful, I felt that too. When I did something loving or compassionate, that was like a electric jolt instead of an emotional anguish. And believe me, it's anguishing to relive arguments you've had with loved ones and family and stuff, especially when you feel for their perspective. Um, I got praised for the stuff I did right, and I was talked to like a toddler who's learning to walk. Oh, how could you have done that better? Could you have been more loving in that situation? And somehow I always knew what the resolution should have been, not how it played out, but how it should have played out. So, I mean, as an example, just someone I'm arguing with, the argument maybe not happening, or me and the other person hearing each other and being able to come to a beautiful meeting point instead of walking away angry and resentful, which, is what we often do. They were so gentle, so loving. There was nothing you could be made to feel bad for. You know what I mean? You did feel bad, but you weren't made to feel guilty or like you should be punished or that kind of thing. Um, when it was over, they hugged me. It was like a group embrace. And in that embrace, I somehow knew that we were a group that reincarnated together over and over again, and that we would each take turns, and that this had been my turn, and the next time would be someone else's. I think Michael's from the angelic realm, but I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say it's an archangel or anything. But I do feel he was angelic energy. Maybe it's my personal angel. I don't know. We're said to have, all of us, a guardian angel. So I think the others were my guides, but we were a soul group, if you will. From there, that hug kind of melts away. And I'm just hanging in light, just light. And I'm so loved and so whole, so cherished. And I feel every piece of that cherishment. there wasn't a wound that didn't heal. There wasn't a, in that moment, I knew I could not have done anything for that energy to have ever rejected me, that I was a part of it and it's all of me. And that energy is just unconditional love on a level that you don't see all that often when you're down on the earth. Um, I think the closest we come as human beings is the love we feel for our child when they're first born. That sense of wonder and awe, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. Um, we went back to my hospital room after that, and it wasn't a progression like I remember moving. It literally, that faded away from me, and all of a sudden, I'm in the hospital room, and I'm floating up around the ceiling. My body's under me in the bed. My Aunt Adele's sitting next to the bedside holding my hand. And against the wall, in what looked like straight back chairs, like visitors' chairs, right, were 6 women. They'd all been introduced to me in my grandmother's house, but I couldn't tell you a single one of their names, just that they were my people. Because at that point, I was still very lost mentally. I think it was because of all the drugs that they were using to keep me on the ventilator, try and keep my body going. But I brought that feeling of peace and wholeness and absolute, I don't know, I don't have a word for it. There's, you feel so centered and whole in a way you don't ever feel, or rarely maybe feel, as a human being. And the confusion was gone. You know, the I knew I was in a hospital. I knew I was sick. I wasn't still lying on a couch in my room. I was in the hospital and not well. I asked where my son was, and the women looked like their bodies, only it was gold light in the shape of a human form. The woman on the far end in the corner, because they went from the corner out along the wall, had this beehive hairdo and a nebbishy 50s suit, 2-piece, skirt and little bustier jacket. And she's knitting something. And all of the women are talking and chatting and having a good time laughing. I can hear their voices, but I can't make out what they're saying. It's just this beautiful murmur. And I asked where my son was. And they said, oh, he's at your mom's house. She's looking after him. And suddenly I could see him like I was in the room with him. He's laying on his stomach on the family room floor, playing a video game. And then I'm back in the hospital room. And I wondered to myself, wow, I wonder how life would have been if he was born in Southern California. And if we'd stayed there instead of coming back to Florida, our lives would have been much different. And I just wondered in that moment how it would have been. And I was instantly shown the house we would have lived in, the street we would have lived on. I watched my son come home from school and get ready with great excitement to go out skateboarding with a cousin of his. And as he walks out the door to greet his cousin, I just know that they're best buddies and that he thinks of him as a brother. And then I'm back in the hospital room again. My mom walks in the door, and she worked at a department store, so she was dressed in her nice work clothes instead of a comfortable pair of slacks and top like she would normally be. So I knew she'd come from work. She comes in and she says to my aunt, has she been awake? Has she said anything? And my aunt tells her no. She opened up her eyes and looked around a little bit, and then she went back out again. My mom crosses to a chair that's sitting in the hospital room, caddy corner in the corner, like the chair's turned sideways. And mom sits down in that chair, which I thought was hilarious because I could see that she was sitting half in, half out of the lap of the beehive hairdo lady. I could see both sides, but both sides were acting like the other wasn't there. The hospital door was over here, and I was looking out of it, wondering when my son would arrive. Where was Alec? When was he going to come? And that's the last thing I remember. I never said, I'll go back to life or I'll go back with you guys. I never, but somehow they knew where my focus was, where my concern was. And he's the reason that I came back.
A lot of times when a guest remembers a family member, especially a child, they almost immediately just pop back in their bodies.
Yeah, my next memory was of being in my body and my Aunt Adele talking to me saying, oh, look, your eyes are open. Are you going to talk to me this time? Uh, so yeah, that absolutely happened with me.
It sounds like your mother was sitting in the same chair as one of your ancestors, but they didn't, the ancestor was in a different dimension, so they could be in the same chair and not see each other.
Yeah, the ladies were along one wall here. Here's the corner of the room, and the chair was literally sideways in the corner. So her sitting in that chair, she was imposing on the space of the other lady, but neither side could see each other. And that's exactly what it was. It was a dimensional difference. The women were at one frequency and mom was in the physical.
After this NDE, you had a hypnosis session or some sort of something that I think helped you process this even more, right?
Yeah. It's the 20th anniversary of the second NDE. I remembered the first part of it, my grandmother's house, meeting the women, and I remembered the last part of it in the hospital room. And I knew something had happened in between, but I wasn't remembering that initially. And it's only recently that I made the realization that I wasn't meant to have those memories at that time because there were family soul contracts, if you will. There were family stuff that needed to play out, and it had to play out without interference. So in 2020, I moved out on my own. And I spent the last 5 years just focusing on both regaining the memories and meditating, exploring consciousness, expanding it, that kind of thing. I'd heard about a man that did life between life regressions who comes from Claremont, California, which is the town I lived in when we spent a few consecutive years in California, and mom's family is spread out all over the valley there. I saw him on an interview he was doing, and I knew him. Couldn't tell you how I knew him, couldn't tell you where I knew him from, just that he looked familiar. And I thought, well, maybe it's because he's from Claremont. You don't think I knew this person in another life straight away. That's not where your mind goes. And I thought, well, I want him to do a life between life regression for me. He studied with Raymond Moody. He was Raymond Moody's protege. So he's very well thought of, you know what I mean, in those circles, and very expert at doing past life and between life regressions. I also needed to validate the information I gleaned over the last few years. When I first came out of the coma, I still had a lot of healing to do. And my focus for the first 7 or 8 years was strictly on physically healing. I was in a wheelchair for a while. You lose motor skills very quickly. I had to relearn all of the basics all over again. So when I had the opportunity and COVID hit, I thought, I'm going to use this time. I have time to myself. I was living by myself for the first time in years. And I decided I was really going to use it. During meditations, Qigong sessions, because I do this very mild Qigong exercise regime. Couple times in dreams. The traveling I did while I was in the coma, and that central portion of the NDE, those memories have been restored to me. But we doubt, right? So I'm like, is this real, or is this something that I'm imagining, right? How much of it is actually what occurred? I was going to California to visit a cousin and visit my mom's memorial last November. And I said to her, just on a whim, would you see if Scott's available to do a life between life session? And he had 2 days available that were the same 2 days I had available. It was just meant to be. So I went to him for the past life or life between life regression. And during it, he asked me the questions. You write out questions in advance that you want them to have particularly asked. And then the interviewer will ask you that when you're in the hypnosis. And it was a 4.5, 5-hour session, really quite long. Longer, Scott said, than he usually did. During that, he asked me where we knew each other from. We had a lifetime together on the other side of the galaxy, on a planet where we were part of a group that trained their voices to be instruments of healing by being able to modulate the frequency and vibration of their voices. And we spent our whole lifetimes doing that. I know that like bone deep now, you know what I mean? But until he asked me that question, I didn't know. As he went through and asked the questions, the information that I received back from the higher self, the deeper self, the monad, whatever you want to call, I call it my bodhisattva, my enlightened being, right? It all validated the stuff that I'd been shown. I'm doing Qigong one day, and I'm deep into the meditative process because it's part meditation, part just repetitive movement. And I'm, left brain's engaged. My right brain kind of wonders, gee, I wonder what it's like to stand outside of time. And just like that, I remembered standing outside of time. And saw the energy. I saw the soul standing next to me on one side and one on the other. And all of the souls have hands dipping down into this pulsating, swirling, like this skein of energy that was made up of like a skein of yarn, only tiny individual threads, gossamer like um, cobweb, like a bunch of cobwebs, only they were a light like a fiber optic line would be. So it was just moving tiny strands of light. And other souls reaching down into it. And from each, say, finger, if you will, because I don't know what other analogy besides a hand to say, they each one was extending down into the energy, and each one was a different lifetime in a different time and place. But they were all happening on the same planet, if you will. So the lifetimes that I was seeing my soul extend down into were all lifetimes here on Earth. I think if you're living a life or a series of lifetimes on another planet, that's what your perception would be if you could see the same thing. It was strange and fascinating and so startling. Do you think you'll be ready for stuff? You're never ready for the revelations. But they just kept coming. And after the life between life regression session, validating that I always felt like I wasn't in my body during the coma. And a friend later told me she'd visited me in ICU. I'd walked out of the hospital. Her husband asked her how I was doing, and she said, "Well, I don't know. Judith's body's in there, but she's not." And that same friend visited me when I woke from the coma, like within hours of waking, still in intensive care. And she said, "You weren't here. Where were you? What were you doing?" And I just said, "Traveling." I met old friends, people I'd known and spent lifetimes with, and I loved them on a level that we don't get to feel here. I knew them in a way you don't know people, except maybe your husband or wife or child, with that level of intimacy and understanding. We are multidimensional, and I got to see a little bit of the being on one side of the dimension and looking down into the others.
After your second NDE, did you get any new abilities?
When I was a kid, I saw colors around people. And Judy, stop that. You're too old for that now. Stop being imaginative. You mean eventually you just stop, right? But it didn't matter that I didn't see colors. I saw density around people, sometimes in layers, but always at least this density around the edge of them like this, right? I see it on you now on the video. And it's like an inch or so out from your body. And it's like looking through a heat mirage. The air just looks denser there. But I can see through it to what's on the other side. Now that's there, bigger and stronger. Like I see a bubble around people. And when I ask to be shown their light, that turns white. If it's someone who's very happy, like just someone picked up a guitar one day and was strumming the guitar, and they went from being just someone standing in front of me, right, to this ball of white light. The person's emotional state has a lot to do with the intensity of what you see. But it was like I seeing the divinity within people. I'm pretty sure I saw an angel one day, because there's no reason anybody should have a light that big and that bright. I was standing outside looking down at a road where this stocky, heavy-set guy, maybe his 40s, I wasn't really close enough to see his age other than he was mature, was walking down the sidewalk. And I asked to be shown the divinity within him. And it was huge and the brightest white I've ever seen. He just walked down the street, rounded the corner, and walked out of sight. But I've never met a human being that had that kind of energy signature. So, Angel, ET, it's anybody's guess, but there was definitely something very special about that man.
Do you fear death?
No, there isn't death. There's change. We change from whatever we're doing in our in-between lives, incarnations, okay? Because it's all a life. Whatever point spirit spawns us, we are eternal. We go back to the inception of all life and we go to the end of all life. But we still work on both sides of the veil, if you will. We have interests, we have jobs that we do, we have assignments, watch over this person, give them a guidance. That's an assignment a lot of people get. And on that side, we plan our lives very carefully. I remember clearly planning my lifetime. And it was the family group I was incarnating with. It was the general path that life would take. It was all planned out, right? What the soul can't do is choose whether to turn left or right if you reach an intersection or a fork in the road. But the main, like, uh, the main pathway is mapped out, and we can take one of several different ways to get there. But where we are born and where we end is set. You have some exit points along the way, like I did when I was offered the option, stay or go. But the failure of the vessel you're born into is programmed, and the soul's aware of that. It's part of the lifetime plan.
You said the failure of the vessel you're born into.
This is the vessel.
So what do you mean by
This
the
is the vessel.
failure of it? Like when the body will die?
Yeah, when the body dies. So to the extent that you died of a heart attack or you died of a car accident, right? You know, when you're planning out that life, that unless something unforeseen crops up, you're given a choice point, that body will fail when you're 26 or 76. I was a paramedic for a few years, and when it's your time, your body fails and the consciousness moves on. And the soul knows that before they come in. From a soul level, none of what we call the suffering of life ever gets transferred. Joy and love get transferred. Knowledge gets transferred. The stuff that, let's face it, our society doesn't value all that much collectively, right? It's belongings and the money and the house and the car, but you can't take any of that with you. You take the things that are the most important, which is the people you love and the knowledge you gain along the way.
If you had a friend that was Suffering over the loss of a loved one, what type of advice would you give?
Shortly after I moved into this mobile home park, a woman that I befriended who lived here already, her mother had been in a nursing home and she came home to die. They knew she was fading and that her kidneys were going. She was in her 90s. And my friend and her family were just devastated. But it was a very loving passing. And I was able to tell them to hold on to the good memories and not the grief. When we grieve, the person on the other side can't reach us to put their arms around us so that we know they're with us, or to send us an image of them. Like all of a sudden your mom pops into your mind and you don't know why. It's because she's looking in on you. But you can't feel that stuff if you're wallowing in that very low frequency and vibration that's grief. Um, Another woman who I'd never met before was on that friend's porch a couple years later. And she was this black hole of grief. And when the energy's that dense and low vibration, you literally see a dark cloud around someone. There's no mist or just dense air. It's heavy. Um, so I asked Spirit to please use me as a channel to give whatever message from her mother would be the most comforting, because she wasn't in a place where she could connect with the woman. And I was shown a woman's bike, old-fashioned bike with a white basket on the front and a little bell, and I'm like, I don't know why I'm being shown this bike. I'm sorry, because I really thought I wasn't getting anything. And she just, her mouth dropped. She said, "Oh my God, I've been thinking for a week about getting a bike just like that to ride around the park, but I haven't mentioned it to another soul, not even my partner." So her mother knew what she wanted to do. And her mom used that, and at my request, Spirit used me to get that message through to her. It gave her the validation that her mom really was there. After that, her grief started lifting and she was able to feel her mother with her, more frequently. Um, my friend, whose mother was the first one to pass, um, has asked me several times to contact her mom. You know, I see her mom will appear in the room with us and I'll say, "Annie, your mom's over there." Or she'll say something and I'll hear her mom laughing and know that she's been there. And it's nice to be able to share those things. When my mom died in 22, of course I felt grief, but I wanted to be able to reach her. So every time I started thinking about how heavy the loss was, I switched to thinking about how wonderful the love was. And you may have to do that a gazillion times before you pull yourself out of that low vibration. But they really are with us, that we never lose the people we love. We never lose the people that are important to us. 23, I went home to California for a visit. And when I came back, a dear friend I'd made in the park was dying. And I was with her when she passed. Her whole house was full of this gold light. It was incredible. She was slipping in and out of consciousness and sleeping a lot in the last days. And I had to wake her up to get her cleaned up or something. And she got mad at me. She said she was rafting down a river with her friends, and my waking her up, the friends got their raft started moving away, and then she couldn't see them anymore. How come I woke her up? They were there to get her. They were waiting for her to be ready. And the golden light in that house was all the angels and that wonderful energy that welcomed her when she passed. So Scott asked me in my regression, what did you do in between lives? What was your job? And I'm shown millions, maybe billions, tiny little gold lights. It's a dark space, and there's millions of tiny gold lights in this space. And I ask, where are we? And it was like someone turned a light up with a rheostat that just came up gradually around me. It was a concentration camp. It was a concentration camp, and there were billions and billions of souls occupying all those dark spaces. And all we were doing was holding on to the frequency of love, making it available so that someone would look across the room and see an act of kindness. You know, they'd witness that compassion. We weren't imposing anything on anybody. We were just making it available. So we have all kinds of things we do on the other side, but we always are available to serve those who are embodied.
Judith, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Sure. I'll give you my email address.
All right. What is it?
Judith.Tylke, that's Tylke, at gmail.com.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
There's two things that you can do that nobody else can do for you. And they were literally the foundation of my both regaining my health, and they're the foundation of my practice now. The first is coherent breathing. Are you familiar with heart-based breathing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If anybody isn't familiar with it, they can go to the heartmathinstitute.com, and they have all of the science. It's been studied for years now. There's all kinds of peer-reviewed stuff. When you breathe from the bases of your lungs, you stimulate the electromagnetic engine in your heart. And that electromagnetic field actually balances cellular and metabolic rhythm. Studies have shown that immune factors go up to 150% in the saliva when tested after people practiced half an hour of coherent breathing. The stress factors and the stuff that builds up, the cortisol that builds up through the course of a lot of people's days, that gets stored in the body and stored in the tissues, that reduces. And all of your cells, all of your organs, everything is moving at the same metabolic rate. You can do it in the car, watching TV. It's not in the shower. I mean, we breathe all the time, but we don't think about how we're breathing. When you breathe from the bases of your lungs like that, not only are you stimulating the heart's EM field, but you're telling your brain by the neurotransmitters being released, I'm safe, I'm in my cave, nothing's going to hurt me. The way we're taught to breathe, just breathing, like nobody needs to teach you how to do that, right? Tends to be all in the top lobes of the lung, which stimulates the got to get ready to run from a tiger. So those are the neurotransmitters, the fight or flight. That's all engaged. So if you spend just even 5 minutes a day doing coherent breathing, you help to make your immune system stronger. But more importantly, you blow off some of the stress chemicals that we accumulate. So that's one. And the second one is your self-talk. We're so kind to friends when they're hurting, they're in a bad space. We listen. We don't, we give them space to be heard, and then we're supportive. But very often we don't talk to ourselves about that. You make a mistake, and the next thing you know, you're focused on it and you've been beating yourself up with it for over an hour. And it's an argument you had with someone, or it takes work, but no one can change your thoughts but you. And when I heard we had like 80,000 of them every day, and most of them are repeats, I couldn't believe it. It's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And then I started paying attention and I realized I make a mistake in traffic. I call myself an effing idiot. Well, that's not very nice, right? It's like, okay, maybe I should just, I made a mistake. It's okay. That's a good reminder to pay more attention. So the way we talk to ourselves makes such a difference, because you can make yourself really miserable just with your own thoughts. So that's the two pieces of advice I would give most people. The one thing everybody needs to know, death is a transition. It's just a change. And there's nothing from the moment of birth to the moment of death that isn't about change. It's nothing to be afraid of. And if you don't know that there's life after death, at least allow for the possibility. A few years ago, my son was he likes to cycle for relaxation, and he was cycling after work one day and was struck by a car. And he was fine ultimately, but it opened the door for us to have some conversations we wouldn't have had otherwise. And one of them was about the second NDE. And he said, look, Mom, I was there when you died. I watched it happen. I know you don't lie to me and that you're telling me what you think is the truth, but I didn't experience it. So I can't say for sure. So just hold the door open for it being possible. And when you lose family, you lose friends, you lose the people that are closest to you. Remember them with love, and you'll feel their presence.
Judith, thank you for your advice, and thank you for being my guest.
It has been truly my pleasure, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.